due to the belief that all queer people are evil and sinful. In the 1920s, the Hays Code and the Motion Picture Production Code included queer media into the list of things that should not be shown in films and television. Queer portrayals of media were often viewed as sinful, disgusting, or as a joke. Due to the pressure of religious people, majority being Christians, wanting media to align with their beliefs, these codes were heavily enforced. These codes helped push the view that queer people didn't exist. That went for in cinema and on the streets. We were not seen unless we were evil or a punchline to a joke. Starting in the 1910s and onwards, we've always been seen as a joke and humorous to media. This was heavily enforced by films like A Florida Enchantment. Due to these codes, queer people have always had to read into the subtext of a film or a TV show. It was simple. In many films that included queer characters, the authors and writers couldn't even explicitly tell us that a queer character was in the film. We couldn't show a queer relationship or talk about them, excluding the negative depictions. We had to use subtext to express ourselves and find ourselves in media. It was hard to be seen or be represented. Although these codes have been abolished, they still affect film and cinema today. When people of the opposite gender just glance at one another, people are lining up to tell us how they're in love. But when two of the same sex and same gendered characters do the same thing, they're just close friends and we're reading too much into it. At the end of the day, no matter what we do as queer people, we will always be seen as reading too far into it. But we've always had to look into subtext as queer people to find representation. It was the only way that we could be seen. For most people, it doesn't matter how much we explain why we see something as queer, it will always be seen as delusional to them. Looking for subtext is something we've always had to do. Since companies want to cater to queer and non-queer audiences, they will queerbait, in which they use subtext and jokes to hint towards a relationship that will never actually happen. They will do this so they can make the most amount of money that they can. They cater to queer people, but they don't outright confirm a character as being so they can keep both audiences to make their payout higher. Overall, representation is something that we often crave, but will never be filled. So we have to fight for it. One way that we can lessen the stigma is support queer artists, support queer writers and filmmakers, as well as people who create queer films. We have had very few films and TV shows over the years that have had successful queer characters. Queer media today is very hard to find, and when we do have queer media, it is very much written under the bury the gays trope, in which they will create a character, have them come out as queer, and then they will kill them off. For example, they did that to Castiel in Supernatural. Within the context, basically, Castiel sacrifices himself for Dean, but we only ever have him come out and be his true self 2 minutes before he dies. Basically, he tells Dean he loves him, and then he lets the empty take him, and he dies. Another example of burying the gays is in the show Killing Eve. We had a back and forth between these characters for a few seasons, but we didn't explicitly get the relationship until the last season. And the last episode ends with Villanelle dying. The last scene that we see is Villanelle's body in the river and Eve sobbing. In the end, it is very hard to have queer media without us being erased or targeted because these laws still affect us now. But there are shows in modern media that do help us and represent us. With shows like The Owl House and Modern Family, they have a lot of positive representations of queer people, and it is greatly appreciated. So we are slowly getting rid of the stigma against queer characters in media, but it's just going to take some more time and advocating for ourselves.